Hi class. You did a good job last week. You made a lot of really neat comments, and I didn't comment a whole lot on what you wrote last week because what I found the week before is a lot of times when I comment it kind of stopped the flow of conversation, and I wanted you to let the discussion roll, so I didn't write a lot of comments. But I want to go back to some of the things that we talked about last week as we started talking about Hinduism, and you're reading and you're getting the vocabulary and learning about this variety of gods. And toward the end of the module last week, I gave you 3 questions about the writings. Do you think that they're authoritative? And monotheism versus polytheism. What do you think about with this Hindu belief system? Is it one God? Is it many gods? And so you chimed in on that, and then we talked about how that all ties together. And I just want to make a few comments on that to give you some more things to think about as we go through this. There were differing opinions between all of you about whether the writings of Hinduism are authoritative. Some of you talked about them being authoritative because they were very ancient. Excuse me. Some of you talked about them being authoritative because they laid out a way for a belief system to happen, gave you things to do, things not to do, kind of told you how to live, all that sort of thing. So my question is, what makes a writing authoritative? What is it that says that the Vedas or the Upanishads are actually worth something? For that matter, what is it about the Quran that makes it valuable? What is it about the Bible that makes it valuable? They all tell us different things. So how do we identify what makes scriptures or writings authoritative? Because at the end of the day, that becomes very important for all of us as we're thinking about religion and what is true and what is not. It takes us back to the truth discussion that we started at the very beginning of the class. What is truth? And the thing that I've been trying to get everyone to see, and we've talked about it in different ways, is there is truth. There are things that are true. You may look at it one way, someone else may look at it another way and define that truth in a different way, but the way that you define it, the way that you understand it, the way that you believe or don't believe doesn't really affect the fact that it is true. I mentioned in one of my responses about the creation of, just think of the creation of our planet. It happened some way. That is truth. Now, different people will say it happened this way, it happened that way, and what they say really doesn't affect the fact that there is a way that it happened. That's truth. So we're trying to identify that. We're trying to identify that in the sense of our lives, in the sense of our reality, in our existence, our purpose, the idea of God, that there is a power, a being, a person, however you want to describe God, out there somewhere, and how do we relate? We're trying to figure that out. So in all of these religious systems, there are writings, or at least in most of them, there are writings that are considered authoritative in that religious system. What makes them authoritative? The fact that they're old really doesn't make them authoritative. The fact that they tell us what to do doesn't make them authoritative, because, for example, we haven't gone to the Quran, we haven't gone to the Bible, but they tell us some very different things about what to do. So can they both be authoritative? If I was to write down what I said were some laws that govern life today and pass them all out to you, would those be authoritative? No, they wouldn't, because I am not an authority. So I think the thing that makes a writing authoritative or not is based upon who wrote them, where did they come from? Do they have a divine connection, or are they just the writings of men? That to me is the ultimate question for authority, and something that we should think about. As we think about that and we think about the Hindu writings, another thing that you would look at is, what do they say? Are they uniform? Do they tell us the same story? Or do they tell us a lot of different stories? Different, for example, the different accounts of creation that you found in your writing. Does that make something more authoritative or less authoritative in that there is differing accounts of creation? So these are the things that we think about as we think of authority. If everything goes back to being based on the writing, its authority becomes very important for us as we try to discern what is truth. Let's talk about the monotheism versus polytheism question. Some of you said that you saw Hinduism as being monotheistic, that Brahman was one God. Others of you said, no, it's polytheistic, there are many, many gods. And then some of you said, well, it's both. It's one God, but worshipped in lots of different representations of that God. So my question is, can a religion be monotheistic and polytheistic at the same time? My answer to that question would be, no, it can't. There either is one God or there are many gods. It can't really be both. So while many Hindus would tell you that their religion is monotheistic, that they worship one God, I think as you look at the way that plays out and what all these other gods represent, that they are really many, many, many gods. They're all deity. They all consider them to be gods. And can that really be monotheistic, one God? The Hindus see one whole consciousness, one whole existence that everything is a part of. That is Brahman. That there is only Brahman. There's only one thing. Time, space, matter, people, gods, it all wraps up into one very connected whole, and that's their concept of Brahman. It's really hard for the Western mind, especially us who haven't studied it very much, to come to grips with what that means. But in that sense, that's where the Hindu comes from, the idea that they are monotheistic. When you look at the way they think about these many, many gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and the vast millions. There are not three gods. Somebody mentioned there are three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. No, there are millions, perhaps tens of millions of gods within the Hindu structure. So I've got to go with polytheism, many, many gods. That doesn't make it right, that just makes it my opinion. Another thing I'd mention from the discussions, does belief equal truth? Several of us wrote about how if I believe this, then it is truth. Just because I believe something doesn't necessarily make it true. I may believe, I'll give you an example. My family and I went to a restaurant for lunch on a Saturday a couple of weeks ago. And from everything that we had found, we believed that this restaurant was open and was serving lunch. And so we drove all the way there, pulled up in the parking lot, walked to the door, and it was locked. They were closed. We believed that they were open, but they weren't. So our belief did not make the thing true. You say, well, that's a really simple illustration, and it is, but it takes us to the deeper thought that just because I believe something doesn't make it true. So just because someone takes these writings, which may or may not be authoritative, and believes them, that doesn't make it true. It may be something that they grab a hold on and they anchor their life on, but belief does not make truth. So, several of you liked Hinduism because it lets you build your own belief system. You wrote that in your discussions. Interesting concept. So I like something because it lets me kind of pick and choose, sort of a cafeteria system of what I'm going to believe and what I'm not going to believe. And as I look at that, I think, wouldn't that be like buying a car and driving it home and then writing your own owner's manual for it? It seems to me like for a belief system to be true, that the originator of the system would need to design what is truth in the way that it should go, and then we as finite humans should then conform to that, rather than us deciding this is true for me, this is true for me, because we may have missed it and may not understand how it all works. So just something to think about as you go through this. There were a few comments about the names of God, thinking about all these different gods maybe being one God, just having different names compared to the way that we, the Muslims, would refer to Allah. We would, as Christians, I say we, myself, as a Christian would refer to God. Some would call him Yahweh, some would call him Jehovah. There's a reference to Jesus, who calls him Abba, which is just the Hebrew word for Father. Different names for the same God. This idea is out there in our society, widespread today, that there is one God, but we all refer to the same God by different names. But in saying that, I think that you have to go to the writings once again in each religion and see how is that God described by a particular belief system. Because if I say he is God and someone else says he is someone else, calls him by a different name, then we've got to look beyond the name to the personality and to the characteristics and see, can this be the same God? Because oftentimes in different religious systems, we find that we have a very different idea of who that God is and what that God does. So those are just some things to think about as we go through the course, as we look at these different religions and how they try to identify God. Are they talking about the same God? Is it really the same and just our understanding is different, or is it a different God altogether? Think about those things. Keep up with those discussions. I love writing your comments to each other, your questions. Try to spend some time in those and respond to those, and think about these things as we go through. Got a couple more videos for you throughout this module as we are looking at Hinduism and some of its major beliefs and things like that. So keep working. You're doing good.